The next one is about relative minors. So relative minors are interesting to me. Thanks for opening that door. What are the most important elements for playing in relative minor keys versus major keys? This is from Mark Monroe.
So the question asked was, what are the most important elements between playing from minor keys and major keys? I think we're going to have to make a few assumptions here about what is being asked to clarify the question. So let's basically answer the question, what is the difference between playing in minor keys and major keys? Again, let's back up and let's think about the overall sound, the overall mood. In general, what's the difference between minor and major? Well, we know they have different words, right? That's what we're talking about. We have the word called minor and we have a word called major. What does that actually mean? Before we talk about the actual guitar, what does it actually mean? Well, in general, Brock, you mentioned earlier about different feels that you can get when you're watching a movie. Maybe there's a part of a movie that's really sad, or there's a part of a movie like in a horror movie where there's suspense and you know something's coming. Or maybe there's a part in a movie where somebody gets married and the feeling of the music is just very happy, right? So in general, the difference between major and minor is that major in general, major keys, major chords, major anything, major scales, they generally feel happy. That's just a basic way to think about it. They generally feel, some people describe it as bright, happy, joyous, positive, optimistic. That's the kind of feeling that you get when you hear something major sounding. Now on the opposite end of the spectrum is minor, and minor is the opposite of major in terms of the feeling. So the feeling is of minor is generally something that's dark, or sad, or melancholic. Like again, if you're watching a part of a movie that, not to go there, but maybe there's a part where there's a funeral, or somebody's about to go to a funeral. The music's going to be a little bit dark, right? It's going to be a little bit almost depressing, almost melancholic, I think is a very good word. So when we talk about playing, well, first of all, that's the difference in the feeling, right, between major and minor. So now let's talk about what does it actually mean on the guitar neck to play in, let's say, a major key versus a minor key? Well, so this is going to sound weird at first, but when you play in minor keys versus major keys, you're playing different notes, which is what makes the sound different, yet at the same time, you're playing the same notes. So how does that make sense? Well, most people, when they think about using what we call the guitar grid, all the right notes across the guitar neck, you have one master roadmap that tells you where all the right notes are. And most people think and teach, honestly, and this is a huge reason why it's so confusing, most people teach that there are these things called minor scales, and there are these things called major scales, and they're two different things, or at least they think they're two different things. But the truth is there's only one scale. There's only one set of patterns. There's only one master roadmap to play in major and minor keys. Now, I'll explain more about what I mean in just a second about that, but let's first back up and think about this. The major scale is the basis or the foundation of everything in music, specifically everything in Western music. Now, this doesn't apply if you like to listen to, say, traditional Indian music, which I love that kind of music, let's say Pakistani music or something that's based on an entirely different musical system. But for our purposes, 99.9999% of the songs that we all listen to are based in, it's called Western music, the Western musical system. Everything in Western music is based on the major scale. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, remember when I said a minute ago that the major scale and the minor scale are actually this, there's not two different scales, there's only one master roadmap. You only have to learn where the notes are one time. And when you do that, then you can actually play in major or minor scales. So what's the difference? It's laughably simple. The only difference between playing in a minor scale or playing in a major scale in reference to the master roadmap, in reference to where all the right notes are, is you simply start on a different note. That's literally it. Now, let's say I'm going to play in the key of A major, and here's my A note right here. If I start playing a what we would call a major scale pattern, the truth is it's actually not a major scale pattern. It can be a major scale pattern. We just call it a major scale pattern because it's easier to think about, right? Let me start on A and play my major scale pattern, and therefore I'm playing in the key of A major. But the truth is you could be playing in 7 different keys. You could be playing in a number of different keys is the point. But of course, that sounds confusing, and that makes it more confusing. So we don't need to talk about that at that point. All we need to talk about is how do you actually play in a major key. Now, it turns out that let's say you're going to play in the key of A major. It turns out that if you start on A and you play what we call the major scale pattern, and then you connect the major scale across the neck, the exact same location of all the notes that you just laid out doesn't change if you want to play in a minor key. There's something called relative minor. And the purpose of this explanation now is not to explain what relative minor is, but is to give you an insight into what it is as it relates to the major scale. Now, for every major scale, aka for our purposes, every major scale starting point, like if I start here on A, first of all, it doesn't matter where I play on the guitar neck, it can still be in the key of A, but this is just for example so we can follow what I'm talking about. If we start on A and we play what we call the major scale pattern, we can say we're playing in the key of A major. But it turns out if I connect all of those A major scales across the entire guitar neck, I can also play in a minor key, a minor scale that has or uses all of the exact same notes in the exact same locations as the key of A major. That's what a relative minor key is. So in this case, if I'm playing in A major, and let's say again, I start my major scale pattern, by the time I connect all the major scales or the patterns across the neck, and I have my entire master roadmap, it turns out that if I just start on this note right here, which is F sharp, and I still play the major scale patterns, I'm actually going to be playing what most people refer to as a minor scale. And what I mean for our purposes is the location of the notes as it relates to the physical hand pattern that I'm using is different. That's why it sounds different than the A major pattern if I start on F sharp and then play what most people would refer to as a minor pattern. The reason it sounds different is because literally I'm playing a different pattern. But what most people don't realize is that the actual names of the notes that I'm playing are exactly the same as the ones from the A major scale. So for any major key, meaning any container, a key is a container, any major key that contains a certain number of notes, let's say it's notes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's also going to be what's called a relative minor key, meaning there's going to be a mirroring minor key that shares those exact same notes. And I'm talking about the letter notes like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So for an example, let's actually say that there are no letters in music. Let's say there's only numbers. So in the key of A major, let's say we have the notes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. And now let's say in the relative minor key of F sharp minor, we also have the notes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The only difference is in the minor key, I'm starting on number 6, and that's the only difference. Because I'm starting on number 6, the actual physical hand pattern that I'm playing is different on the neck, and that's what makes it sound different. Now, in terms of sound, this is where we go back to where we started, which is what is the difference in sound? Well, when I play the major scale, it sounds happy or bright or optimistic or joyous. If I play a minor scale, doesn't matter where it is, any minor scale is going to sound sad, melancholic, even depressing, dark, etc. And that is the difference.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff, a lot of good detail. And I think that's one of those things that's a lot of people, it feels too confusing for them, too daunting to understand the how major and minor scales relate to each other. If you understand what Jonathan just taught you, then it cuts the amount of scales, or the amount of keys in half.
In half, exactly.
Literally,
Yep.
just cuts them in half. So